Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody, wherever you happen to be right now. And welcome to this afternoon's webinar on securing AI, using it safely without becoming the next headline. So for the next hour, we are going to be discussing some best practices to ensure responsible artificial intelligence use. Now, before we jump in, a few little things just to kind of throw everyone's way. This session is being recorded. Like any of our previous webinars, we are going to be uploading this onto YouTube. So if there's anyone out there who was unable to attend, we will have this available I would say by the end of tomorrow. It'll be up there and ready to go. Now, a little bit about myself. First of all, for those of you who don't already know me, so my name is Jamie Neary. I do work here full-time at LearningBrick. I have been in IT and training for 30 years now and have seen a lot of things over the 3 decades that I've spent working in the field. Focused primarily on networking and infrastructure, and looking at Microsoft 365 and Azure. Also spend a lot of time working with SharePoint and, of course, things like cybersecurity. And most of the training that I do is on behalf of either Microsoft, EC Council, and CompTIA. Now, a little bit of things to throw your way in here today. So starting with setting the stage for AI security and why AI security is going to matter now. So when I was building this presentation, I was kind of debating as to what the primary focus was going to be. Whether it was going to be from the user's perspective, which I did a little bit of in our last webinar a month ago, whether it was going to be from the designer or the implementer's perspective as well. And realistically, we need to talk about a number of these different elements. So we do need to kind of see both sides of the equation. Concerns for the users and concerns for those who are going to be implementing solutions in their environment. So we're going to be discussing the concerns and protections for both of them. Now, let's start with a little background information and why AI security matters now. Well, one of the key things is that AI has moved from basically an experimental technology to realistically an integrated component of everyday workplace tools, often without any type of deliberate adoption decision. So it is either tools that have been thrust upon us from a provider or that users hear about through the grapevine and now go ahead and start implementing or using these solutions without any real formal guidance, which obviously is going to bring about a number of different challenges for us. So features that include things like email drafting, meeting summaries, document suggestions, insights towards our data analytics, search enhancements are now already integrated inside of our familiar software platforms. So whether or not we are embracing AI, it's there. Employees are already using it. And from an organization's perspective, really need to take a look at having formal discussions on policies and definitely on risks. So AI security isn't really a future problem. It is a present operational reality. And realistically, the most significant risk today isn't really malicious AI or autonomous AI. As much as I like to joke about it, we're not quite there at Skynet yet. But really, it's the ungoverned human use of all of these tools that are going to interact with our private corporate information. So whether they copy information into a public tool because it's convenient, whether they trust AI-generated responses without doing their due diligence and verification, or whether they just unknowingly activate some AI features that have broad data access. And we are going to be talking about some of these components throughout our session here today. Now, a lot of this and a lot of the, we'll say, comparisons when we look at AI as a new technology that's being adopted, it really mirrors a lot of the earlier technology shifts that we've had, such as our email, cloud storage, and our mobile devices, where the original productivity and the usage really outpaced security controls, and security implementations. So, do we outright ban technology? Well, history shows us doesn't really work very well. So it's going to drive more unsanctioned underground use. When we talk about IT, we talk about shadow IT, where people go ahead and start using tools that are not necessarily monitored or known by the IT department. AI has the similar component to it as well. AI also has shadow AI, where people are now going to start using ChatGPT or Claude or Google Gemini without having the formal consent, blessing, and monitoring of the IT department. So we need to acknowledge reality, that it is there. We need to make sure that we educate our users, and we make sure that we implement governance frameworks in order to secure and benefit from the new technology. So we need to make sure that our users are empowered in order to make informed decisions, recognize risk patterns, and use AI intentionally, properly. And those are really kind of the key components that we need to take a look at. Now, starting things off here with how generative AI really actually works. So our generative AI basically is going to be how the system generates responses. What is the system going to do? So what is it and what is it not? All right. When a generative AI system uses what's called an LLM, or a large language model, it's all based on predicting the most likely sequence of words or outputs based on the patterns that it learned in as part of training. So it doesn't necessarily have a massive database of here's all these possible questions and here's all of our outputs. When we're looking at generative AI, the ones that are responsible for doing things like all the creation, we take a look at sequencing, predictive analysis in here. So our AIs don't reason. They don't feel or grasp intent unless we start explicitly telling them these things. And what's troublesome for the average user is they don't distinguish between accurate and incorrect information. They know what they've been trained on, and based on their prediction of what the output should be. And the challenge is they come across as being supremely confident that this is the right answer. Whereas in reality, we have probably seen that is not always going to be the case. So this creates a unique risk profile in the workplace because AI sounds authoritative, so confident in its answers. We take it for granted that it's not always going to be right. It's not always 100% correct. Now, another important distinction that we have to take a look at is between a public AI tool and organization-approved enterprise AI environments. When we go to, and we'll say, unlicensed free AI provider, what are they doing with that information? They may store the prompts, they may log the interactions, or use the data that's put in there. Okay? That might not back your contractual obligations, any regulatory protections, whereas some solutions do integrate with your internal environment and they offer data protection. It doesn't leave the safety of your organization. It plays off of data access controls. It plays off of sensitivity labels. And of course, from an enterprise management perspective, we have the ability to track and audit these details. So when we're not using a sanctioned program, users might unknowingly expose any sensitive internal information to the world at large, which is now going to be public information. And they may rely on outputs that aren't protected by corporate policies. And as we mentioned, might not be correct in the first place. So the AI needs guardrails. It needs a framework so that it can understand data sensitivity, classification, guidelines for prompting, and any type of policy restrictions that we need to have in place in our organization. So regardless From a security perspective, responsibility remains firmly with the human side of the AI world, either as the user or as the implementer. We are in charge. Best analogy that I can give you when we start looking at this is AI should be treated like a junior assistant. They're there to help. They may sound confident, but they may not know what they're talking about. They still require supervision. They still require validation. They still require proper context. So it's great to do a lot of the heavy lifting, but we're not going to take everything that they say as gospel, or at least we shouldn't be taking everything that they say as gospel. Now, let's take a look at the AI threat landscape. What are the big challenges that are out there nowadays? So, first and foremost, data exposure and privacy risks. Now, the majority of the risks are predominantly people-driven rather than technology-driven. Now, that's not to say there aren't some technological problems with AI. All of the different providers are going to have different options when it comes to the data and what they do with it. But data exposure and privacy risks are usually going to be the most immediate concern, because people will paste sensitive customer data, internal documents, intellectual property into a publicly accessible AI tool. There might not be any malicious intent, but this behavior could violate privacy laws, they could violate contractual obligations, or just internal policies that have been set forth by the organization. Second major risk is misinformation and overtrust. Now, depending upon which flavor of AI that you're looking at, usually refer to it as several different things. The most common term that you're going to hear for this are called hallucinations. Some providers like to go ahead and call it fabrications. Same idea. It's where you get your answers that appear logical, but they have factual or legal or technical errors. So we always want to verify. Third category, really starting to drive home right now, as you are going to see in a little bit in here, identity and social engineering threats. When we talk about phishing, and if you've ever sat any of my cybersecurity courses, bear with me for another minute or two because it's going to sound vaguely familiar. We look at phishing. Phishing is the #1 threat vector that's out there nowadays. Why? Because phishing is easy. That is the bottom line to it. It is not hard to create a phishing message. You also don't need a huge success rate. Now, the challenges that we've seen with phishing over the years, especially the early days of phishing, was the messages were horrible. There was blatant spelling mistakes in there. There were grammatical issues. So we could very easily discern what was real and what wasn't. Or let me rephrase, a lot of people could very easily discern what was real and what was fake. Now, much, much harder to go ahead and do this. So using AI to craft realistic phishing messages, to automate reconnaissance when hackers are going to take a look at potential breach points for a network or against a user. One of the first things that they basically should do is their homework. Not getting too involved in this because this is a different course, but as part of the reconnaissance operation, you want to know what you're up against. You want to find out about the technologies. AI can make that a breeze now. Now we can also get into the world of things like deepfake audio and video for impersonation scams. And once again, there are various tools that are out there that are not that hard to go ahead and use. Hey, once again, on some of my cyber courses, I've shown various different deepfake videos that are in there and how much time and effort that it goes ahead and makes. Time permitting, maybe I'll play one later on in here, but as a spoiler, my face maps usually fairly nicely onto Bryan Cranston. So from a Breaking Bad standpoint, that's usually a great little video that I like to go ahead and create to show. Now, the other option is the embedded AI visibility. So the fact that AI features get potentially activated through program updates or operating system updates, integration with other software, or any third-party extensions that may not have a formal IT review. And what they'll gain access to is dependent upon how they were created. Okay, so why should AI risk matter to organizations? Well, look at our core AI security risks. AI has moved from experimental into operation. When we look at executives and when we look at management, they see AI as a productivity accelerator. Technical teams look at it as a great, powerful tool for analysis, for development, and to assist in decision making. Assist being the key word. On the flip side, though, this creates new categories for organizational risk that traditional security and governance models were not designed to handle. When we take a look at our security strategies that might have been in place from 5 years ago, and hopefully we're updating our security strategies more than once every 5 years, AI was not really at the top of people's mindsets. Now, everywhere you turn around, it's AI this, AI that. Now, because AI systems are quite capable of processing and summarizing and transforming large volumes of data, all of our sensitive information can move much faster and much further if system guardrails have not been very clearly defined. And once again, we're going to see some interesting examples of this here very, very shortly. Now, from a people perspective, people treat AI tools as helpful personal assistants instead of an external entity or an external system. And that is the key word. It is external. Even though it's integrated into our environment, we may not have the full operational control over it unless it was something we internally developed and designed, which leads to other potential problems. So they take some liberties with it, as we said, pasting in emails, pasting in confidential data. From a platform perspective, AI tools get delivered quite oftenly as software as a service. So think things like 365, which means it inherits third-party risks, software bugs, outages, logging, retention policies, things that we may not have properly defined. So as an IT standpoint, we have to make sure that we address any of those concerns. And finally, from a process standpoint, users can mistakenly treat the output as being definitive, authoritative, 100% correct, which once again, not the case. So from an adversary's perspective, just flip the script here temporarily. From a hacker's perspective, all these great AI capabilities that benefit employees can have a negative spin on it and be leveraged by threat actors to scale up phishing attacks, can scale up development of malware, reconnaissance, and extortion activities. So, and that's always been the challenge when we start looking at a lot of these tools from an IT perspective. What benefits us from a defensive posture can also be turned around and benefit hackers from an offensive standpoint. And there's always this cat and mouse game going back and forth with this. Now, our corporate data leakage via employee use. So one of the most cited misuse cases comes from 2023 with employees at Samsung, where they pasted confidential source code and internal data into ChatGPT to assist with debugging, to assist with summarization. So the goal was productivity. There was no malicious intent, but it was a serious intellectual property and data governance concern. ChatGPT is an external service. It doesn't have necessarily the same restrictions as our internal corporate environment. So that data becomes publicly available content. So therein lies the mismatch between employee expectations and the platform realities. So as a user, I'm used to having tools that are going to make my life easier. ChatGPT becomes another tool to make my life easier. But because that's not necessarily governed by my organization, we are at risk when we use an unsanctioned product. Not necessarily an untrusted product, but an unsanctioned product. So the platform we use will have a direct impact on all of this. All right, now from a business impact standpoint, obviously, if we look at things like data leakage, this is going to be, for a lot of organizations, let's say a heavy-handed response. Company-wide ban, restrictions on AI usage, which can now slow innovation, frustrate employees who are getting clear productivity benefits, summarizing meetings, drafting emails, summarizing documents, creating presentations. But because people didn't use it appropriately, now no one has it anymore available, no longer for everyone. Brings up potential regulatory concerns about trade secrets, contractual obligations, as we said, any internal intellectual properties. So it's not just users, but it's also executives, it's also management, it's also IT. AI governance is everyone's responsibility. Now, if you're on my last session, you will also recall the other fairly recent one that I mentioned, which took place from last summer, which was down in the States, where the acting director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, working for the US government, uploaded a whole bunch of sensitive contracting documents into the public version of ChatGPT, thereby exposing that information to the world at large. From the head of cybersecurity. So anyone can make these mistakes. Scenarios like that, though, sometimes you want to shake your head at. Now, let's take a look at some real-world threat scenarios and misuse patterns. So our AI-enabled attack scenarios that we have happening. So a lot of times this stems from everyday workflows rather than some sophisticated hacking technique. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but quite often, once again, it is user error. Okay? Now, the hacking usage is growing and growing every day, but once again, that's just a piece of the puzzle. So one common scenario, once again, and I don't want to sound like I'm beating a dead horse with this one, but employees pasting contract information, medical data, financial information into a public AI to save time. Because we're all about saving time, being more efficient. But what happens with our data is the giant question mark. AI-enhanced phishing attacks that incorporate accurate job titles, recent projects, social media details. Now, that used to be, and still is, to be quite honest, part of regular reconnaissance when we take a look at the security perspective in identifying a potential victim or target. Now AI just makes it that much easier. We can have it go out and search online and find out all the details about someone that's available for the picking, that's publicly there. We have deepfakes, voice and video attacks used to impersonate executives, vendors, public officials. We see certain public officials who shall remain nameless down south constantly post these incredible videos of whatever they happen to think of at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm just going to leave that right there. But a more subtle scenario is going to be AI summarization tools, giving inaccurate interpretations of things like company policies or meeting discussions or, God forbid, legal requirements, which we then go ahead and share internally and we mark it as being authoritative. So in each of these cases, AI is doing what it's supposed to. It's functioning exactly as it was designed. But the risk is arising from either misplaced trust, lack of verification, or lack of guidance. So we need to make sure that we train our employees to recognize these possible scenarios. And that is going to work in conjunction with technical controls. Now, digging a little bit deeper into here, Gemini, Google Gemini. So because the prevalence of Google and Google Gemini being there and available, the Google Threat Intelligence Group has documented how threat actors have been attempting to use Gemini for reconnaissance, for code troubleshooting, for content generation, and for translation. So whether it is developing an exploit, whether it is crafting a phishing email, whether it is creating fake websites, using Google, and this is just one example, it's directly from Google's threat intelligence because it is prevalent in any of the platforms that are out there. Now, they do have safeguards in place so that I can't go and ask Gemini to go ahead and create a new malware strain for me. Okay, but if I can get into the coding and I can have it design some bits and pieces without giving it the full scenario, we absolutely could do something like that and get some components that we would need to assemble later on in order to craft a new payload. So AI adoption raises the baseline capability for your adversaries. Phishing is more polished. Social engineering scripts are more convincing. And even though AI doesn't directly generate any malware, it reduces the time and effort it takes for them to plan and execute campaigns. And once again, Gemini and the Google Threat Intelligence Group has several examples of this, in which we're going to be seeing here in a slide or two. So AI risk is bidirectional. It is going to impact both defenders and attackers. And once again, something that I stress constantly on any of my cybersecurity courses. Any of the tools that we use for a positive from a defensive perspective, we can also flip the script and be used as an offensive negative perspective as well. So any AI-enabled productivity tools that we use have to be matched by investments in security awareness, in detection, and in the response capabilities. Now, with the agentic AI and data extortion, taking a look at Anthropic and using Claude, which is another major player in the AI space as of lately. Claude's been in the news for a bunch of different reasons over the past few months. I'm going to be talking a little bit about that as well. But when we're talking about Claude and Claude code that's being used in here, being misused by cyber criminals to scale out their extortion operations. They were able to attack code with agents and allowing their AI to do things like credential harvesting and data analysis, and even assisting in decision-making about which information to exfiltrate and how to structure ransom demands against an organization, all from a publicly available model. So we're looking at an increase in speed, an increase in scale, and the increase in the precision of attacks. Tailor the ransom demands based on their analyzed financial data. If we're going after a small business and we're saying, hey, I'm going to hold your server hostage for $10 million, and they don't have $10 million, good luck with that. But by doing a little bit of homework and saying, okay, well, they're probably willing to pay $500,000, becomes a little bit more effective when you look at things like that. So it's about maximizing leverage against their victims. So AI becomes a force multiplier. While we take a look at how it's going to improve our internal efficiency, adversaries are looking at it as to how to enhance the criminal operations. Now, a month ago to the day, we have what's called the Vercel breach. So Vercel is a cloud-based development component that leverages what's called OAuth, open authentication. Now, what happened in this scenario was they had a security incident regarding unauthorized access to their internal systems. So a third-party tool got compromised first, what's called Context AI. So this is where we take a look at the whole supply chain problem that's in here. Attackers stole OAuth tokens tied to Google Workspace integrations. So for these guys as a developer and third-party provider, they had a flaw that got into their environment and therefore into Google's environment by using open authentication. Tokens got used in order to access an employee's account, and then they were able to pivot inside of Vercel's internal systems, and they were able to access a wide variety of customer environment variables. Now, they did not say anything financial was accessed, but if they can get into the source code and they can get into the API keys, which serve as the connection point from my secure environment into a third-party provider, that's a stepping stone in order to find any amount of data that's available in your internal organization. So it was an AI-driven supply chain attack. There was no requirement to phish any passwords. It did not have to bypass multi-factor authentication. It was able to just piggyback off of an exposed weakness. People were saying, okay, well, there wasn't any real sensitive data that got compromised in there. It wasn't personally identifiable information. It wasn't credit cards. It wasn't financial information. But it's code, it's source code, and therefore it's access to other data, other systems. So another thing to keep in mind is that non-sensitive data doesn't mean that it's harmless. Now, last recent example in here, once again, Google Threat Intelligence, and this is from this month in here, sticking with Claude, going back to that, and Anthropic. Malicious actors were using Claude to develop and sell ransomware by individuals with limited technical skills, which is one of the scenarios that was in here. Criminal groups and state-linked actors have been using commercial models to refine and scale up their attacks. Gemini, Claude, tools from OpenAI, which is ChatGPT. Anthropic developed a new model called Mythos, or Mythos, depending upon how you like to pronounce it in there. And then they decided that they're not going to release it. This is one of the ones that was potentially going to be integrated into the US Department of Defense. And they kind of stepped up and say, no, we're not going to disable the safeguards because this has some pretty powerful capabilities. Okay, it was finding so many zero-day vulnerabilities in every major operating system and every major web browser. Most organizations look at Firefox as being one of the most secure web browsers, okay, or variants therein of Firefox. Mythos found 271 zero-day flaws. That's more than the entire last year for updates to Firefox, just in the first run through of this. Now, criminals have been taking a look at leveraging a lot of these vulnerabilities to conduct a mass exploitation campaign. And they were using something that was not Mythos because this has been restricted from being publicly available. So there are a variety of other tools. And as you can see in here in the last one, we have one that's called OpenClaw as well. Okay, which gives the users abilities in order to give over tons of their personal information, large chunks of their lives to an AI agent with no guardrails. So there's no safeguards, there's no anything in place. So it'd be used to develop a wide range of possible attacks. If you look hard enough, you can find a lot of things out there. Now, for using AI securely in this case, once again, just from the user's perspective, and then we're going to switch gears and look at it from an IT and a management perspective for a little bit and then kind of sum up. So when we look at responsible AI use in the workplace, we need clear, practical principles that employees can apply without having any deep technical knowledge. Users need to understand data classification boundaries. What's classified, what's not classified, what's protected, what's private, what's internal, what's external, and where am I allowed to use it? Human verification of the AI output is essential. We do not take anything AI tells us as gospel. It should be treated as a draft or as a suggestion. Remember, junior assistant means well, may not have a clue. Approved AI tools and platforms that are going to provide enterprise-level protection, such as logging, such as access control, and any contractual safeguards. My internal data stays internal. It abides by my security permissions and my sensitivity configurations. And once again, AI should be an assistant not a decision maker, and can never stress that enough. I know how easy it is to plug something into an AI and here's a wonderful, well-crafted response, and then we just want to copy and paste and say away it goes. Do the due diligence. Now, switching gears for a moment and taking a look at this from an enterprise perspective. Our business management and executives, if we are implementing either an off-the-shelf AI or even something that we're going to custom develop our own, depending upon what the use case happens to be, we've got a few core risk domains that we have to take a look at. So whenever we're looking at an AI implementation, what are we going to be concerned with? So number one, look at bias and discrimination. AI models can reflect biases in the training data. So if I'm designing an AI that's going to take a look at approving mortgages, okay, and I'm going to use data from 25 years ago, where the bulk of people who were applying for mortgages were men, is that going to lead to potential discrimination against women applying for a mortgage? Do we have equal representation? Remember, AI is not doing the thinking. It's going by what it knows and was told to know. So this has the impact on potentially things like hiring, on lending, such as mortgages, policing any information or security, or any type of customer segmentation. Ensure your data is reflective of the client base. Lack of transparency. So given that scenario where we get a disproportionate number of women who are being rejected for mortgages, can we see the decision-making process? Can I look in? Can a user see what was the condition, what was the criteria that was used in order to come up with that assessment? So you get these black box AI decisions where it's like, well, I don't know how it came up with that answer. It just did. There's that lack of oversight. So that provides a variety of legal and compliance challenges. We have to have explainable AI. We have to have logging, and we have to have decision traceability. Now, part and parcel of this is also going to tie into accountability. So if AI gives incorrect information, if AI makes a mistake, whose fault is that? Not as easy as an answer as you would think it would be. Is it the system's problem? Is it the human's problem? So we have to take a look at governance processes for whatever our AI is being used for. Look at the security side of the world, look at the legal side of the world, look at the risk side of the world. We're going to talk about some frameworks regarding this here in a few moments. IP and copyright. If I am generating images, kind of like what we saw in my intro slide in there, which was using one of my photos, okay, I'm not worried about copyright on that because I use my own photos. But if I were to generate something that is potential copyright infringement, a lot of AIs have safeguards against it. Not all of them do. That becomes a problem. So human review is necessary. Our vendor and our data sets due diligence, what we use to train the AI model, has to be all valid, legitimate information. Now, just general data risks when it comes to our AI systems. There is heavy reliance on large data sets, which includes personal information. That brings up potential privacy laws. One of the biggest ones that you'll hear about is GDPR, which is for the European Union. All right, but in Canada, we have PIPEDA. So if my personal information is potentially being exposed or used without my consent, that's a problem. So we need to incorporate privacy by design. If there's any type of information that needs to be kept and maintained, can it be safely anonymized? Or we have certain standards in play to ensure that it is not readable by just anyone. Data leakage, we've mentioned several different times in here. Any sensitive information gets leaked via prompts, via integration, by our outputs. So one thing that we really need to have from an IT perspective, once again, for any administration course, you'll usually hear me go on about this, acceptable use policies within an organization that is reviewed frequently and signed off on frequently. I've had discussions with some organizations where it said, yeah, we signed off on that when we got hired on, and then haven't seen one since. And in one instance that I'm thinking of in here, it was that person's been there for over 10 years. I think technology changes, once in a while. 10 years might be a little long to go without reviewing these types of information. So needs to be reviewed and updated and signed off on regularly. Hallucinations, been there, done that. But just once again, recapping some things we've already seen. Verify. Always, always, always verify. There are incredible risks when we talk about legal information, financial information, healthcare. There's a well-known case of a lawyer in New York who used ChatGPT to quote case law that was completely fabricated. Bad things happen to that person. Now, as far as the human impact and compliance, the impact on people. Now, this is where we start getting into a lot of the challenges in here. So is there a potential risk for job displacement? It depends. I'm not going to lie and say that there isn't the risk that people are going to wind up losing their jobs. There's always that possibility. But where a day-to-day user gets the most impact from is de-skilling. Because there's that AI that's available. It's a crutch that we now start to lean on. I don't have to think as much. I don't have to analyze as much. I've got a tool that's going to use it. So while it might increase productivity, it might decrease my skill level when I now start to rely on that. And now if I don't have those tools available to me, what do? The ethical implications of AI-driven decisions, as we had mentioned before, this is where we worry about bias. This is where we worry about the accountability. So if there are decisions that are going to impact human lives, they must be verifiable. They must be justifiable. Human-in-the-loop process is essential. Once again, absolute given. We need to review everything. Workforce training and AI literacy programs. We need to make sure that users know what's out there. A lot of them do already know what's out there, but know how not to use it and when not to use it. So we make sure that we have policies in place in order to accommodate these. Compliance, well, because this is such an evolving technology, systems that are in place for compliance rules and laws are updating and adapting, but it is difficult to keep pace with this because of the natural evolution and the rate in which it is going right now. So we have to always keep our eyes open. We need to assess the risk in our environment constantly. As far as policies and guardrails that are in place, once again, acceptable use policy, can never stress that enough. Make sure users know what is and is not allowed. Make sure that we have our data handling and classification policies in place, and those should already be in place before we bring AI into the equation. AI is just going to augment any weaknesses that already exist in your data handling in your environment. As far as operational guardrails are concerned, so we worry about filtering content, so we don't want it to allow hate speech, for example. We worry about access control, permissions. I, as a regular user, should not be able to go in and look at company financial data just because I put in a query in as part of my AI. Now, you might think that's a given, but it's not. It depends on the implementation. We worry about bias, we worry about fairness, we worry about any type of regulatory compliance, and we test it against adversarial scenarios. It's not good enough to test a solution as to how it's supposed to be used. We always need to test a solution for a worst case scenario. It's easy to design a program when a person clicks this button, clicks this button, clicks this button in order. What happens if they do something out of order? What happens if they put in something that we did not expect? How does the system handle that? We need to be prepared for that. Because guarantee you, the world's going to test that for you if you're not testing it. So as part of our overall governance framework, we have to worry about our data. So we take a look at our lineage, we take a look at our data quality, we take a look at our data classification, and that's where everything needs to start off on. We look at the model that's being implemented, validation of the information, the overall monitoring for the responsibility, versioning as we move forward, and keeping older versions easily available in the event that the new version isn't quite doing what it is supposed to do. We worry about the operations side of things, role-based access, auditing, proper lifecycle management, and of course our risk management, ongoing risk assessments, incident response when we've discovered some potential misuse, proper escalation paths as a result of that. So you notice down at the bottom in there, we have kind of our key principles we have to make sure that we adopt. We need to worry about transparency in the decision-making process. We need to worry about accountability. We have to worry about fairness, lack of bias, security, and compliance. So from our executive discussion questions, what are we looking at in here for your leadership workshops and your strategy sessions? So from a risk and security standpoint, where is AI currently accessing sensitive data? Okay, and even more generic than that, what data, start off there. What data does my AI have access to? And where is AI currently accessing any sensitive information? What's the highest risk AI use cases? Plan for worst possible scenario. From a governance standpoint, do we have a formal AI governance framework? If we don't, we should get on that. Is AI included in our enterprise risk management? Like I said, it's out there. There's no sense ignoring it because it's so prevalent in society here today. We need to have a plan to address it. From a compliance standpoint, what regulations are going to apply? Do we deal with financial data? I've got to worry about PCI DSS. Okay, I might have to worry about GLBA, Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. I might have to worry about PIPEDA. Okay, if we deal in healthcare, we worry about FIPA. Are we audit ready today? That is a dangerous question. Because most organizations, if they give an honest answer on that, probably the answer is no. So we need to make sure that that's going to be changed to a yes in a very short time frame without cutting corners. And then finally, from an ops standpoint, do we have visibility into all AI tools? Is there any shadow AI in our organization? If we have sanctioned the use of Microsoft Copilot, do we have people still using ChatGPT because that's the one that they learned about from their friends? If that's the case, that's a problem. Which ties into how are my AI incidents going to be detected and reported? Are they going to be detected? Are they going to be reported? And if so, how? And what's the proper escalation path? What's the chain of command it has to go through? All right, looking at the safe path forward here. So final couple of slides on this one. So practical security takeaway for everyday users. Once again, use approved AI tools only. Don't enter sensitive information. Don't enter any personal data into a public AI system. Know what is allowed, know what is going to be shared and with whom. Users should be cautious of any urgent or emotionally charged requests because that is one of the easiest phishing tactics, especially if they involve any type of financial actions or any type of approvals. Fear factor. It works. It works very well from a social engineering standpoint. Need to encourage a culture where employees feel comfortable asking questions or reporting any uncertainty regarding everything that we've mentioned in here, because it will help prevent honest mistakes from escalating into full-blown incidents, or as we saw, potentially becoming the next headline. All it takes is an innocent mistake for this to start spiraling out of control. So it is very much going to be a shared responsibility to help normalize these behaviors and not getting into playing the blame game. So last but not least, and then I'm going to turn this over to Bill for a little bit of a summation on some of our offerings. When we look at the safe path forward, part of it's going to be balancing the risks and opportunities. Yes, this is a great tool or a great set of tools that really help increase productivity. Now, whether or not an organization is going to face a choice between reactive restrictions or proactive governance, therein lies the challenge. Lock it down after we've had problems, or let's design a proper path forward and embrace and adopt and do it properly and do it securely. AI is going to be a powerful accelerator, but we've got to give it guardrails. We have to have clear principles. We have to have strong governance. And most importantly, we have to have informed users. Everyone has a role to play. Security teams, leadership, employees, all need to be involved in shaping the responsible use. Any organization that invests early in AI education and visibility and policy alignment are going to be better positioned to adapt as this continues to evolve. So the one key takeaway is successful AI adoption is not going to be defined by eliminating the risk entirely. Because in reality, there's no such thing as having completely zero risk, no matter what we're talking about. But we can manage it deliberately and transparently. So we take the potential source of AI anxiety, turn it into a strategic advantage that is grounded in trust and accountability. All right. Our Vice President and Head of Sales, Bill Lennox, is going to take the floor here for a few moments and tell you a little bit about our AI pathways and promotions. Bill, all yours.
Thanks, Thanks, Jamie. So the key to recap a little bit here is it's not to try to paint everything with the same brush, paint every individual with the same training plan. The key is being proactive from an organization standpoint, staying ahead and looking at specific training before one of the two P's come into place. And the two P's that I'm speaking about are projects or problems. Is when you're talking about integrating and expanding or adding anything into any type of environment, your environment is going to be completely different than your next door neighbor's environment or counterpart's environment. So we want to be providing the best solution, but we need to kind of have a conversation with the individuals or the organizations beforehand. Jamie, you want to move it over to the next slide? So as you can see, I'm not going to go through all these different courses, but as you can see, there's a wide variety of paths you can go down on. And these are just some of the bigger named courses. So there's your end users, there's your IT professionals, and then your security courses. So what's good for one might not be good for another. So we don't want to just say, okay, you need to take this course and this course and this course, and these guys need to take this course and this course. At the end of the day, if your project problem is not aligning, and we need to discuss that pre-training to incorporate that in the build or the teaching sessions, to make sure that we're addressing A, the concern, or B, the project that you're going to be looking at. The whole point of this is being proactive, and you're going to kind of hear Jamie say that a little bit, myself immensely say that, but we want to provide you and give you the tools to not only identify, strengthen, and protect, but before these risks turn into a real world issue. we've seen it so many times where somebody does a project and then they come to us after it's been integrated, and then we try to build a plan around that project, but the items that are embedded in that project, it's already kind of widespread, or we've left holes. So then there's a lot of extra cleanup that's to be done after that. So the key to this is being proactive, understanding what you have, whether your employees need it or want it. Again, the need versus the nice to have. Or B, is it ongoing and you just don't know about it? And I can honestly tell you, the amount of individuals that I've had conversations with that didn't know that it stemmed to this regard, or this was, the process was this powerful. I'd have, if I had a quarter for every time I had that conversation, I'd be rich right now. So the key, again, to all of this is let us kind of work with you on a case-by-case basis or an organization-by-organization basis, design the best plan that's going to fit you and your teams to be successful here. Again, there's a lot of fear, and not debunking what Jamie's saying, but again, you'll always hear all the negatives, but there is a lot of positives that it can do. It's helped me immensely, but again, it's been situations where I've been working on stuff, and I've even brought this to Jamie's attention, where I was building something and it actually came back to me and said, well, I don't have your permission to access this specific file to get this specific quote. And I just kind of stopped. I was like, well, I didn't know it could do that. You have those aha moments quite a bit when you're working with AI, because you don't fully understand how you're essentially training it for every day when you're talking to it and bringing in the concepts of what you're working on. It learns and, like Jamie says, predicts and provides information. It's just a matter of being able to control what you're getting out of it. So if you're thinking about training, or if you're thinking about any projects that are upcoming, let us know. We're more than happy to schedule a 5 or 10 minute call. We'll bring Jamie on the call. We'll discuss what the best plan is. If you're looking for certification, depending on what course you're looking for, obviously there's not much customization we can do, because we have to teach you the materials to get that cert. We don't want to leave something off or not focus on something and you go to write the exam and then you don't know about it because we didn't do our job correctly by teaching you. But again, there's still lots of room for added material that we can work on. So just kind of think of us as your pre, during, and post support for anything AI related moving forward. And next session. So we've been heavy AI, we're heavy cyber before this. The next few sessions that we're going to be focusing on will be going into one of the most popular courses that we see and that we have been teaching over the last, I'd say, 6 months to a year, is SharePoint. So on July 15th, we're going to be hosting a SharePoint user, basic tips and tricks. So this is essentially your everyday user. So if you're touching a keyboard and you use SharePoint, join us. We'd be more than happy to share some shortcuts or some options that might make your life a lot easier. And then in August, we're going to be doing one for the managers and the admin side of SharePoint. So if you're setting it up or need to have edits done in your environment, or would like to perhaps even consider looking at automating stuff using Power Automate, that'll be the webinar that you'd want to sit on. So we look to kind of continue with the webinar feature moving forward. Most of you guys all have my email address or contact information from the website. Feel free to send me notes in regards to what you'd like to see on these webinar series. So if there's a SharePoint question or a SharePoint administrator question, let me know. AI questions, cybersecurity. If there's other topics that you'd like us to run webinars on down the road that you think you and the team would be interested in, let us know. We're more than happy to kind of pivot and go down this this path together. The whole idea is to try to build out our free educational side and kind of beef up our YouTube presence with some of these Jamie taught sessions. So feel free to keep us in the loop and let us know if we can help moving forward, okay? Thanks, Jamie.
No problems. Thank you. So if you do have any questions right now, you can go up to the top into the Q&A panel. I just posted Bill's email address. I'm sure everybody has it, but if not, I did just list it in there. It is simply bill@learningbrick.com. If you have any questions, feel free to fire away. If not, hopefully you enjoyed. Thank you for coming, and hopefully we'll either see you on the next webinar or in class.
Thanks, everybody. We'll stick around for a little bit if anybody has any questions.
Absolutely. Alrighty. On that note, that's a wrap. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.